Hello and welcome to witnessaid UK. This is part 2 of my Watchtower leaving experience. In the last video we were up to 1998, 3 years after I had walked away from the Watchtower quietly. But on the 27th of February 1998 things changed. It was about 10 in the morning, a Saturday, and Elder John Maxwell phoned me. I was quite surprised to hear from him, since during the last 3 years I'd heard nothing from him at all. After a few pleasant introductions and formalities, I asked him why he was phoning. And he said he was phoning just to see how you feel about Jehovah's Witnesses now. And he asked if I might wait a few moments while he connect another elder, Rory Darragh, in a conference call. So I said fine. And I knew why, of course. He was wanting a witness to get me to disassociate myself by telephone. For some strange reason, the connection failed. John was disappointed. And I said, oh, that's a shame. So, John was very keen to meet. And by this time I had my website, witnessaid UK. I was writing articles to assist people to come out of the Watchtower. I think by this time also I had written an article called "If You Accept a Bible Study with Jehovah's Witnesses," and that showed the transformation from being an ordinary person to a Jehovah's Witness cult member. So John was very keen to meet, but the following day, Sunday, he was going down to the borders of Scotland to Hoyok to give a public talk. I think it was in the afternoon. And he would be very busy. But could he get back to me just to confirm if he could arrange things? So I said, fine, that's fine. So we agreed to meet the following evening, Sunday night, the 28th of February, in my house. And over the next 24 hours, he phoned me several times to try to set up a convenient time, and to let me know he was on the way, and to let me know he was rearranging things, and he would probably manage to be there on time, and so on. He was really keen to go, to meet me. And interestingly enough, just at the end of the telephone call, before he hung up, I said to him, oh, and John, why was it you wanted to meet me again? And he said, just to see how you feel about Jehovah's Witnesses now. So it was then that I knew what he was trying to do. It was a prepared format. Something he'd said before, I'm sure. So I prepared by getting myself a digital tape recorder from a friend. I set up the room. I arranged that they would sit on the sofa. The tape recorder was in a drawer in my study desk, and I would sit on a single chair. And sure enough, they came up as agreed. Rory Darragh appeared to be sleeping on the couch, although he simply had his eyes closed and was listening, I suppose. And John Maxwell did all the talking. And the conversation was about how I felt about Jehovah's Witnesses. Did I want to be in the truth or not? And so on. And I said to him, well, you know I can't answer that. Because if I was to say, I don't want to be, then I would be disassociating myself. And I'm not going to do that. Because the consequences of that would be that you and Rory, and my mother and my sister, and all Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide would be forbidden to talk to me. So of course, I'm not going to say that. Well, they raised the point that they were very concerned about some of the things I had been saying. Now, in the recent months, I had bumped into witnesses in the street, and occasionally they came to my house for a toilet stop when they were out going round the doors. And I remember one occasion when a witness woman called Margaret came with another witness, and we were talking in my house. And I was reading a lot of Bible at this time, reading the New Testament. And as I say, I think Christianity must have just crept up on me. And she said to me, "You sound like a born-again Christian." And wasn't that a funny thing to say? And why would she say that? Well, it's because I was talking about Jesus Christ. On another occasion, I met Margaret in the street with a witness woman who was a stranger to me. And she introduced us, and she said to the woman, "Tony's sister's in the truth." And I smiled mischievously, and I said, "Is she?" Then on another occasion, I met the son of John Maxwell. He was attending Edinburgh University at the time, doing an academic course. And as you know, probably, Jehovah's Witnesses and higher education are not supposed to go together. So when I saw his son, I said to him, "How are you doing?" And he said, "I'm at Edinburgh University now." And I said, "That's great. Finally, you're learning to think." I was really pleased for him. So anyway, no doubt these comments had got back to the congregation. And to touch the elder's son was probably just too much. So how do the elders operate? Well, they might come to your home unexpectedly. You will think it's a shepherding call, even though you haven't seen them for quite a while. And your defences will be down. You will think that two loving shepherds of the flock have come to show a caring interest in you and your family. But it's not really like that. Not at all. They might send them along at Christmas time to see if you have a Christmas tree or Christmas cards. They might send you along at Easter time to see if you have Easter cards or Easter eggs. They'll fish and hope to find something on you. And that's what they were doing with me. So we can continue the conversation, and I made some comments about the finished mystery book written by Russell in 1916, and I mentioned some of the things I'd been learning. John asked me if I had confidence in the Watchtower Society and the Faithful and Discreet Slave, and I asked him, should I have? By the way, you can see the whole transcript of this conversation on my website or blog, witnessaid.blogspot.com, and you can see a word-for-word transcript of the conversation that we had. It's under the title Tom and Jerry, because it's a game of cat and mouse between two elders and a former Jehovah's Witness. So anyway, the upshot of all that was that they left, John threatened me with his Bible by reading me a couple of scriptures, saying that I was in the category of the people in, I think it's 2nd John, another misquotation by a Watchtower elder teacher. You can look that up. It's talking about people who are bringing false teaching, not the teaching of Christ. Funnily enough, I should have read it to him. So I heard nothing until one night in March. I was lying on the couch watching a football match, I think, on TV, and the phone rang. And it was a Watchtower elder named Chris Taylor. And he chatted to me as if he'd seen me yesterday, and how are you doing, and how's it going, blah blah blah. So I asked Chris, why are you phoning? And he said, oh yes, I was wanting to invite you to a meeting. And I said, okay, who's going to be there? And he named 2 men who are elders in Edinburgh Waverley congregation at the time. And I said, this wouldn't happen to be a judicial committee by any chance. And finally, he admitted it. And I said, why didn't you tell me that when you first called? Oh, I was going to, he said. So I said, what's it about? And he says, oh, we just want to have a chat. And I said, I think you better get a charge. Because if you're wanting to have a judicial committee, you should have a charge. You don't go to a court of law and just have a chat. You normally know what it's going to be about before you go. So he said that they had witnesses who had been concerned about some of the things I'd been saying. And I said, who would that be? And he didn't tell me. But he could bring them forward if necessary. But what he did say is that John Maxwell and Roddy Darrick, who had called on me, would be called as witnesses against me. So 2 agents provocateurs are sent to my house to entrap me, suggesting that people are concerned, but they never bring forward the people who are concerned. They just use the testimony of the 2 agents provocateurs. So I said, I'll think about it. I'll decide if I'm going to come along. So I consulted with my friend, and he said, well, if you go along and they keep the rules, then fine. You'll have something for your website. And if you go along and they don't keep the rules, following their elder's manual, then you'll have something really good for your website. And at this stage, I had obtained a copy of the elder's manual, which was not freely available, as it seems to be nowadays. So I downloaded the elder's manual. I studied the part on judicial committees thoroughly, so I knew exactly what the procedure would be if they followed it properly. And I decided to go to the Kingdom Hall, which I did a few days or a week or 2 later. You can see the complete transcript of that event under the title The Three Stooges on my blog, which is called witnessaid.blogspot.com. So just to give you a quick summary of what happened, I went along to the Kingdom Hall. I prepared well First of all, I didn't shave for about 4 days. Jehovah's Witnesses don't like beards or stubble. I wore sneakers, gym shoes, and clean jeans, clean clothes, and I wore a tartan casual shirt outside my jeans, long before it was the fashion to wear a shirt outside your trousers. And I sauntered along to the Kingdom Hall with my tape recorder in my bag. And I just had no respect for these men whatsoever. I wasn't even slightly impressed by them or intimidated by them. So the meeting opened and an elder said a prayer, and it all followed procedure in the Elder's Manual. They said that the charge was apostasy, and did I have anything to say? And as you'll see when you look at the transcript, I took out a sheet of paper with about at least a dozen questions on it. And the nature of the questions was all about procedure. It was nothing to do with the Bible. It was about Watchtower policies and procedures. And that is very important, because you cannot possibly successfully argue with Jehovah's Witnesses on the Bible. Not because they're right, but it's because they are stupid, quite simply. They do not know what the Bible says. They do not know how to discuss the Bible in any other way but the way that the Watchtower has taught them. So I concentrated on policies and I began asking questions which they refused to answer. So I was doing a lot of talking, but the fact that they refused to answer did say something. They were just refusing to cooperate because they were the ones wanting to ask the questions, and they certainly didn't want to give anything away. So I was asking questions like this. Why are we meeting in secret? Am I allowed to remain silent? Of course you are. Well, if I remain silent, who's going to defend me? Why am I not allowed to have someone with me to speak for me? Why are you coming after me when I left the club 3 years ago? Why are there no witnesses in the room? And to this they said, but we're witnesses. And I said, well, do you think I could trust you to give a reliable account of what's being said? Why is there no transcript being taken so that we have a reliable account of what is being said? We are witnesses, they said. And I kept asking questions like that. Is this a trial? Are you judges? They admitted to that. Yes, yes. Then I asked about the 2 witnesses who were sitting outside. And this is the point at which I knew I was winning. How did I know that they are not listening at the door and hearing all the discussion that is going on in this supposedly private room before they come in and give their testimony? So after a brief discussion with the 3 of them, they moved the 2 elders from the main hall outside the door into the cloakroom. And I was delighted. I wanted to laugh out loud, because at this point I knew I was winning. I was destroying them in every way you could imagine. Psychologically, mentally, intelligently. I was having a field day. And when the meeting started again, after the elders had been put in the cloakroom, I just kept pressing and pressing and pressing and asking them more and more and more questions. By the end of 45 minutes, their arms were tightly crossed, and under their chairs, their legs were crossed at the ankles. A very, very defensive, closed position. They were so uncomfortable. Now at the end of 45 minutes, my tape would be running out. So I said I'd have to go to the toilet, and I went to the toilet so that I could change the batteries and turn the tape on my recorder. But while I was out of the room, they interfered with my bag, my personal possessions, and the two elders who had been sitting in the cloakroom had come in. One of them, as I've told you before, seemed to be quite experienced at this kind of thing, and he has obviously given them some counsel. Because it was his show. It was all being done under his direction, I believe. So I came back in. I was very lucky because when I went out, I was drawn onto a doctrinal matter, and I asked for a couple of Watchtower volumes to be brought from the library, and that was a big mistake, but I was lucky to get out of it, as you'll see. When I came back in, the very first question they asked me was, "Do you have a tape recorder?" And the reason they suspected this is because they had been in my bag, and I could tell by the sounds that my bag had been touched. Now, you remember I took my tape recorder to the toilet. Well, I had a backup tape recorder in my bag. So anyway, the next 20 or 30 minutes were just a shambles, because they insisted that they wouldn't continue the meeting so long as there was a tape recorder, and I refused to admit if I had one because I didn't want to give anything to them, and I also refused to deny it because I didn't want to be called a liar later on. And I kept asking, why are you concerned if I did have a tape recorder? Why would that matter? You're not ashamed of this, are you? If things are being done right, then there's nothing to hide. But they kept going back and forward like this, insisting that I tell them if I have a tape recorder or not. And finally, we just agreed to differ, and I went home. A couple of days later, I think it was a Friday, Chris Taylor came back with one of the Judicial Committee elders, knocked on my door and asked me if I would like to come back to continue the meeting. I kid you not. After that, he wanted to continue. So, I think the point is that they had been in touch with the London Bethel headquarters by this point. That is standard procedure, to get advice from the local branch headquarters. So I said, I'll have to think about that. So I consulted with my friend again, and he says, well, good material for your website, and it's only your head that's going to roll. And I thought to myself, if I do this again, I will be crucified. They will have the stones ready for me when I walk in there, and the cross, and the gun, and the rope. So I thought about it, and I decided that I would carry the whole process through to its completion. And you can read about that on my blog under the title The Rude, the Bad and the Ugly. That's on witnessaid.blogspot.com. So I attended the meeting again. This time there was no prayer. There was no preamble. There was no invitation to ask me anything. At the very beginning of the meeting, the very first question they asked me was, "Do you have a tape recorder?" And I said yes. And I took it out of my pocket or my bag and said, "Here it is. I'm going to record this meeting so that we have an account of what is being said." The elders' faces fell. They were completely confused. They were speechless. And they said, but, you said you wouldn't bring a tape recorder." And I said, "I don't think I said that. You may have asked me that. But anyway, I'm going to record this meeting." So for the next 5 minutes, we argued about whether I was going to record the meeting, and they insisted that they were not going to have the meeting so long as I had the tape recorder, which, by the way, was not switched on. So I made a huge fuss about this. Unfair, unjust, it's against my human rights, everything I could think of. I wanted to cause a huge fuss to divert them. And finally, I gave a great sigh, and I opened the tape recorder and took the tape out, and I put the tape recorder on the table and said, "Take it." But I had a second tape recorder in my bag, and it's thanks to that that I had the recording to write out the rude, the bad and the ugly transcript. I was very lucky too, because in putting that tape recorder in my bag, I had bumped the volume control, and it was just audible. It took me a lot of writing and listening to write out that transcript. They called in their first witness, who was Roddy Darrach, and he did his best to remember the conversation we had had in my house on the 28th of February. When I tried to cross-examine Roddy and ask him a few questions, I was basically shouted down. I was not allowed to ask questions. He evaded the answers, and when I tried to rephrase the question, they simply shouted me down and said, "You've asked that question already, you're not allowed to ask it again," and so on. So that was a bit of a waste of time. Then John Maxwell came in, very smug, very, very comfortable, sitting in the chair, lounging back, very, very comfortable. He's been here before, I can assure you. And he gave a very fluid account of what had happened on the night they came to my house. And I tried to cross-examine him, and they shouted me down. "You can't ask that, you asked Roddy that question." They were too stupid to understand that I was trying to get the two witnesses and check the stories and compare the stories. Then something absolutely shocking happened from a legal point of view. Not that this should really be compared with a decent law court. But John Maxwell, the witness on the stand, the witness for the prosecution on the stand, asked me a question. he asked me, "Do you want to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses?" And I said to the three elders, What are you doing letting him ask me questions? I'm supposed to be asking him questions to try to verify if what he's saying is true. And you're allowing him to cross-examine me. They couldn't get that. They were just too stupid to get it. So anyway, John gave his testimony and he smirked and said, "Good night, Tony," and left. And I think he and Roddy Darragh went home at that point. The rest of the meeting was a desperate rearguard action on my part. I was being mauled. And I knew it. But I kept fighting back. And I asked some more questions. By this time, I was determined just to waste their time and get more material on tape for my website. So I asked them, why were they coming after me 3 years after I left the Watchtower? If a person leaves a golf club or a chess club, people don't come after them, harassing them. I was a member of the public. So why were they interested in prosecuting me? I pointed out that for 3 years I had had no kingdom ministries given to me. I had not been given a blood card, refusing blood transfusions. I had not received any shepherding calls for at least 2 years. And I had not received any of the club benefits of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Also, I had never been invited to any social events of Jehovah's Witnesses. So it was very clear that they themselves did not regard me as a member of the congregation. So why were they now trying to say that I was a member of the congregation so that they could disfellowship me from the congregation? Of course, they didn't answer that. And they insisted that they were doing everything right. I asked them quite a few other questions, and they read a couple of verses, standard texts about the faithful and discreet slave, do you accept them, and so on, Matthew 24, and a couple of other verses. And I didn't get involved in anything like a doctrinal discussion with them. It was a waste of time. Then he said to me, "Would you just step outside for a moment while we get the stones ready?" And I said, "What? You're kidding. I'm off." I just laughed in their faces and I left. So, a couple of days later, Chris Taylor came to my door with one of the committee meeting elders, and he read a couple of verses to me at the door. And I said that I was busy writing the transcript of the trial, and I didn't have much time because I was right in the middle of it. And by the way, may I say that those transcripts took me about a week each to write out. Every cough, pause, is in those transcripts because I wanted them to be an absolutely reliable and honest record of what was said on the day. So they took me a lot of work, and I can assure you, I give my word, that those are accurate records of what was said on the night, or on those nights. So Chris and his colleague read a couple of verses. One of them, I think, was from 2 Peter. And by this time, of course, I had read the New Testament at least half a dozen times, and in different languages, may I say. And I just laughed because they were so out of context what they were saying. So he left, and a couple of days later I wrote an appeal letter just to annoy them. And you can see the appeal meeting in the long goodbye. I didn't record that, I just wrote a summary of it. But the idea was simply to draw out the process to its full conclusion and for as long as possible. Because you've got to remember that since the 28th of February, they have been wanting to make an announcement that I am disfellowshipped or disassociated. Now, it is now May, I think, after we've had the second meeting, and I lodge an appeal letter within 7 days saying that the whole process was a farce. So they responded to my appeal letter by saying that they couldn't meet me immediately because I think they had a local convention on at the time. And I said, oh, what a pity. And I think they proposed another date in June, and I said, I'm sorry, I'd love to meet you, but I'm going to Greece on holiday. I'll let you know when I come back. So I went to Greece for 2 weeks, had a lovely time, and I think a week after I came back I contacted them, and now it's July, and they're preparing for their district convention. So I suggested that we meet, knowing that they had their district convention. And of course they had to reply and say, oh, we've got a district convention on, we can't meet you. And I said, oh, what a shame, because I was so keen to meet you. So finally, they wrote to me in August, and they invited me to a particular date in August and said, come along, ready or not, because we're having the meeting whether you are there or not. So I went along without a tape recorder, and it was a fairly friendly discussion with 3 new elders present. And we discussed various things. You can see that on the transcript I've told you about. It was all very friendly. It was kind of a good cop, bad cop scenario. And at one point they said to me, would you mind stepping out of the room for a minute? And I said, no chance. I'm not stepping out of the room, because when I come back, you'll have a pile of stones ready. And they said, no, honestly, we just want to talk about something. Would you mind just stepping out for a minute? So I trusted them, foolishly, and sure enough, I came back in the room, and they had come to a conclusion, and they said, well, we'll let you know what we're going to do soon. And it will be done by a certain date, because one of our members, one of our group of 3, is going on holiday next Friday. So it will definitely be before that. Well, I'm still waiting for that phone call. And it seems to me, based on an email I received from someone who had been a circuit overseer, that they had spoken to the branch office about it, and they decided just to leave it alone. But finally, after about 3 months, I think it might have been November time, 1998, that I received a letter from the chairman of the appeal committee, and he said to me in that letter, It appears by the comments on your website and by what we've discussed together that you don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. And he basically said, go in peace. We have no further interest in you. So I was never disfellowshipped, and I never disassociated myself. But I know this: I am glad that I'm not a member of that club anymore. Thanks for listening.